Welcome, everybody, to this Fireside chat with Nicole Gibson from inTruth. I'm going to be honest, this was probably one of the most heartwarming interviews we've done so far on the Fireside chat. Yes, this is about technology, but in this interview, we really lean into what it means to be human, the emotion that drives what we do, and what supports that underneath. Enjoy this. It is a treat. Nicole, welcome.
Thank you, Marcus. Pleasure.
Now, I wanna deep dive into not just inTruth, but you. And you don't know the questions that I'm going to ask you. Before we start, I'm going to start with the same question I ask everybody. If I just tuned into this conversation, why should I stay? Why does it matter?
I think we're really at an intersection right now, societally, where even the very essence of what it means to be human is in question. And I believe that the research and the work that my very brilliant team and I are doing is exposing the truth of what it means to be human, what sentience is, the importance of human and relational intelligence. And I truly believe that the understanding of this in enough of our minds is not only crucial but potentially existential if we don't reach a critical mass of people in the next several years.
So if people don't know inTruth, if people don't know what it is you're building, tell me about that journey. Kind of how did the journey to where you are now start? Just so people have a bit of an understanding of what inTruth is about, what you're building, and kind of where that all started.
Yeah, it's a point of view that was informed by a confluence of very diverse experiences. Maybe to be the person that reads the last page of the book first, but it will help set the context before we go into the backstory.
Yeah.
The tech itself is measuring emotional regulation. So it's a world first model called the React and Rebound Model that looks at how emotion moves through your autonomic nervous system, so through your parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, and we quantify that and allow users to actually see their nervous system in real time. But if you had told me going back 15 years or so, where I suppose that's really when my entrepreneurial journey began, if you told me that I was going to end up in tech, I would have thought that you were truly out of your mind because I was really in spaces that were the diametrical opposite of technology. So I actually started in theater and I was a trained actor and I did that instead of regular high school, and that was my first love. Um, and the reason, which kind of came more to light as I went through my journey since then, of why I loved theater so much was because there was this moment in time that you could create as a performer where you captivated an audience to actually open them up and to give them permission to feel things that they don't normally feel comfortable feeling. But the whole setup of acting and theater to me, although I loved it so much, it definitely made me ask deeper questions about society. Because how could it be that, you get 1,000 people in an audience in the West End of London, which is, my early years were very much informed by that growing up in London. That was my, biggest joy to be in that environment. But even as a kid, I remember looking back at the audience and thinking to myself, why is it that in this context, people feel safe to cry? In this context, people feel safe to, welcome grief. But in their everyday life, especially, growing up in a very kind of conservative British family, people wanted to run a million miles away from any of those things. But given this kind of contained environment, it seemed to be okay. And it definitely made me question the cultural condition. So that was really the roots, I think, of this curiosity that I've had around why have we developed these kind of societal foundations that actually exclude the very thing that makes us human. And what I've come to realize through my work over the past 15 years is the result of that, I believe, are all of the points of um, challenge that we're seeing in our society. What we were talking about earlier, like cultural erosion that many countries are experiencing right now, the mental health crisis, the fact that 70% of Americans are dealing with anxiety, that the leading cause of death in most Western countries is suicide if you're under 50 years old. Like these are statistics that I believe have actually come from the denial of the real human condition, which if you look at other societies in different points of time, that was actually a central piece to the societal exploration. If you go back to, Greek philosophers, there was a willingness to explore single questions over decades. We're now dealing with the antithesis of that, which is you're lucky if you can, span your attention 3 seconds. And when you combine that with hyper individualism, which removes people from this understanding that there's actually an interdependence that exists, what I think that results in, plus, emotion being taboo, emotion not being something that we really understand, is creating a dysregulation in a world of so many people, which most people are masking every day. That's creating this collective instability. So that was really like the thesis that my journey started with, wanting to understand that, wanting to unpack that. But the form that took over the years has been very different. So actually, I started as a nonprofit leader, and I started a nonprofit as a very young person at 18, actually. And I wanted to bring what I knew from the arts into the mental health space, which was very much about giving people a space to express themselves, giving people a space to really tell the truth, because that's how you're believable as an actor. It is if you, same with stand-up comedy or these kind of, even a musician, the more honest they are on stage, the more believable and impactful their work is. So I wanted to create environments where people had that same opportunity. And I built that into a framework called emotional infrastructure, which ended up being very popular in remote and rural communities, in particular in Australia, because the mental health crisis was escalating quite rapidly. And it gave people a way of understanding, okay, we don't need to just build economic and physical infrastructure and opportunity. We actually need to build frameworks, especially in communities that didn't have a lot of support. They'd be lucky to have doctors and psychologists fly in, fly out once a month. It was very much a communal approach, which proved to be very effective. But back then, that was considered this really outlandish approach to mental health, because there was this core denial, actually, that our mental health was impacted by environment, impacted by culture. The way of thinking was very much like, this is a biological predisposition. It's a chemical imbalance in your brain. And if you get a diagnosis of depression, that's something you're going to deal with forever. And it's basically, it's like getting diagnosed with terminal illness, which I always thought was absurd. Um, and that scaled and grew in popularity through a lot of resistance. And I was so inspired by the feedback that these communities would give, which was, it's super profound. And I know, Marcus, like you'd have your equivalent examples of this in your work. But when you hear someone say, today's workshop has impacted me more than 10 years of traditional therapy, you start to ask questions like, well, why is this the best, the best system we have? And so that led me to advocacy. And I always assumed that my role in advocacy would be to take these case studies and to advocate for alternative funding structures within mental health. What I didn't expect was that advocacy actually led to the Prime Minister's Cabinet in Australia asking me to serve as one of their commissioners in mental health, which gave me this front row seat, I guess, to be able to frame recommendations. And my whole advocacy at the time, which now isn't a new idea, but back then it was investing in mental health is an economic investment, because we were starting to see people, not be able to perform jobs. You had $600 million that was just in absenteeism. Like these were kind of new statistics that were coming to the forefront back then. And that took my career in a really unexpected direction. I was 21 years old, and I had oversight over a 30-something billion budget, which was a crazy amount of responsibility for someone that age.
Yeah, right.
And it was also the juxtaposition of the work I had been doing, which was very raw, very in person. And I felt like, if I was standing here at the bottom of the mountain, all of a sudden I had the vantage point from the top of the mountain. Um, and I became this bridge because a lot of people working on the front line never had that visibility. And ironically, a lot of people working in, federal cabinet had never understood what it was like to do, suicide intervention work in a remote community that has never, had any of these conversations. And it was there that I realized we need solutions that are as personal as that frontline work, but as scalable as government has the power to scale an idea. It felt like a dichotomy that was impossible to solve, but I think like any founder that's truly obsessed with a problem, that was kind of the problem that just kept me awake at night. Like, how do we create something like this? And after years of thinking, I eventually came to inTruth because I recognized that the most intimate data one can have is the actual physiology of what's going on inside of them. And the deeper I went in healthcare and mental health, the more it started to become clear to me that people in mental health love talking about quantifying outcomes, measuring impact. But when you really dig beneath the surface and you ask questions like, well, define impact for me. What does success look like? What are we actually measuring? And no one can give you satisfying answers. I realized that we're trying to diagnose a heart condition without an ECG. We're trying to diagnose a blood pressure condition without a blood pressure cuff. And the theory of change started to become quite crystal clear to me that we needed to develop a similar technology and innovation that could translate the thing that is most correlated to mental health outcomes, which ironically is not an EEG scanner. It's not the brain frequencies and what's happening in the mind. It's actually the nervous system. In one of our recent publications, we looked at our data next to GAD-7 outcomes, self-reported GAD-7, and our physiological data that's just coming from a wearable explained in some instances up to 85% of those GAD-7 outcomes, meaning with no subjective surveys, no GAD-7 tests, no PHQ-9, no DSM-5, in this early research study, we're seeing that nervous system regulation and one's ability to regulate the ANS is correlated up to 85% of those GAD-7 outcomes, which actually flips the entire conversation of mental health on its head, because no longer is it a mental health condition, it's actually a regulation issue. And if it's a regulation issue, it starts to become quite clear that things like DBT or cognitive behavioral therapy aren't really going to cut the mustard when it comes to long-term sustainable transformation. And for us as a team, like, this is now our critical mission, is to help people see in healthcare and even on a societal level, the reason you're likely struggling with emotional reactivity, with a dysregulated nervous system, with your mental health, is because the way that we've even been taught to look at the issue is actually fundamentally incorrect, on the base level. And yet we have billions of dollars pouring into a system which is really leveraging the early work of Carl Jung, which, he's a brilliant mind. I'm a big fan of him. But the fact that that became modern day psychology with no input in the 21st century of how we can use true measurement, now that we have something like this, I think we're going to look back in 10 years and be like, what were we thinking? Just like we look at giving people lobotomies, and think, what were we thinking? That's not a solution.
Yeah. There's so much to unpack there, but I'm just smiling because I'll tell you one of the reasons why I'm smiling. You probably don't know this. So I started my career at 16 in the military, but I was actually a musician. Isn't it funny that we both come from an arts background and ended up in this field?
Yeah.
The other thing that's a word that resonates, and it's a word that I'm talking about a lot at the moment, and I think this explains why we are where we are, which is you talk about solutions, I talk about solutions, but actually the narrative around mental health and well-being is all around support. So when we look at things like CBT, when we look at talking therapies, absolutely 100% they fit into that support category. Now, I'm not going to go into things like the polyvagal theory, but if you use the polyvagal theory as a bit of a map in
Mm.
regards to if you are in that flow state, if you hit that top level of the amber zone, then, and you've got that support, the environment, I talk a lot about environment. If the environment is there, yes, 100% those things work. The
Mm.
NHS's own statistics even say less than 50% of people going through talking therapies see any meaningful result. But as you say,
Yeah.
we're putting billions of pounds into that. Now, I want to lean into this word truth because I have a phrase,
Uh-huh.
and this is my phrase. So, if we were to look at our emotional systems, so our thoughts and our feelings, that's our beliefs, right? Our beliefs are really a story that we tell ourselves and the way in which our nervous system interacts with that story that we tell ourselves. Now, we
Mm-hmm.
know the mind's there to keep us alive and it does it on prediction. So, it's not actually truthful. But
Mm-hmm.
here's the thing that I often say to people is that truth is a belief, it's a thought and a feeling agreed upon by multiple people with influence and or power. Now, if you're creating a system which is based on, let's look at this from a finance perspective, on OPEX, okay, so ongoing payment systems, ongoing with no kind of capital investment, there's no kind of firm grounding. I'm getting a solution, I'm getting this.
Mm.
Then it's no surprise that we're in the situation that we're in. Equally, when we start to dig into the neuroscience, because I know this is all neuroscience back, not just psychology, it's
Yeah.
neuropsychology. When we start to look at cell division when babies are still born, when they start to be born, the first thing that actually comes online before all the cortexes of the brain is the nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's
the
right.
way in which we're looking at the problem is like a house that the foundations are crumbling and we got cracks in the walls and we go, okay, we'll just plaster over that, stick some paint on it, and it's fine. So as we lean into truth, in truth, and we look at in truth as a solution, you've already kind of gone into this, but what is different about what you're doing? Like, how are you doing that? For layman's terms, some big words that we use today. So, if I'm not a neuroscientist, I'm not a mind geek like me and you, in simple terms, what is the value to me
Mm.
as an individual, me as an employee, me as a government organization that is looking for a solution?
Yep.
What is the simple value of the work you are doing, and how are you proving that at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few questions in there, so let me try to sort of explain it as I would to a 7-year-old, as they
Yeah.
say.
Yeah, I'm a
Um,
7-year-old.
yeah. Um, so maybe let's start with the fact that a lot of these the sort of collectives that you were just mentioning, like what would the impact to a government be, to a team be, and then maybe to the individual within the context of their relationships. A lot of people within these different ecosystems are trying to change the state of something. Like you're trying to change the state of healthcare, the state of a nation, the state of how you feel
Mm,
every day. Um, what we're doing is really going back to the origin of where state even can manifest
mm,
from,
yeah.
which has been largely invisible um, always, or as far as we know in recent civilizations.
Yeah.
Um, and what I mean by that is your nervous system, and this is kind of neuroscience 101, is responding, its job is to respond to a stimulus very quickly. And it's doing that a lot more rapidly than your mind can. So if there's a loud bang that goes off behind me, after 100 milliseconds, 100 to 200 milliseconds, my nervous system has responded to that. It's then going to take several seconds for my brain to actually respond to the information my nervous system is bringing forth to it. And then my mind, my cognition is going to kick in it's going to look back and it's going to say, oh, actually, it was just a car kicking back. There's no danger there. Okay, I'm okay. But that initial response that happens in the nervous system is actually responsible for about 90% of our behavior. So if you think about it from that perspective, we're being like, the determination of our lived experience is being driven by a system that we're yet to fully understand. And this is the science and the visibility that our team are bringing forward. The equivalent I give is like the fMRI machine. There was only so much we could understand about the brain and the components of the brain and the volume of the brain until there was a way to actually see it. And so the link between that initial stimulus and the state of being is a journey that needs to be broken down, and the data needs to be filled in, because it goes stimulus, emotion. So that's actually the rawest piece of information that any mammal has is emotion, which is why it's crazy. Like, if you want to control a society, and this is maybe more of a philosophical point, but if you want to control a society, the most effective way to do that is to give them a strange and displaced relationship with their emotion, because you cannot control your emotion. Like, you cannot control, it's an automatic response. You can control the meaning you prescribe to those emotions. You can control, and we'll go into our scientific model because it brings a framework to this, which I think is quite useful for people to understand. You can control the way that you rebound from that emotion, but the whole concept of being in control of your emotions is wrong to the core. Because we wouldn't want to change that, because without that, our physiology has no intelligence left. Now, that emotion then becomes feeling, which is the cognition that kicks in and says, okay, Marcus, how are you feeling? I'm feeling happy. But actually, there's been so much information that's happened in your physiology before you even answer that question. And those feelings eventually will, if unaddressed, lead to a mood and then a state. And your state of being actually originates from that initial response to stimulus. And so the simple way to understand why this is impactful is we've been trying to make transformation and change on big geopolitical levels, national levels, and even individual levels in this kind of like autocratic way. I'm just going to force myself to change my state without actually understanding the ricochet of where that state is actually manifesting from. And the 90% that's been unconscious to us, in RTT or NLP, they'll say, 90% of you is driven by your subconscious. Well, yes, there are many modalities to help you tap into your subconscious, but what are you actually tapping into? Because it's not that the subconscious is out here, like a cloud. Like it's actually connected to physiological systems, and these are the kind of bridges now that, as a team, we're building to actually help people bring definition to these things.
Can I just lean into that? I want to lean into that because this is really, really important for this is actually one of the most important things that anybody can take away from this, is that if we were to look at a kind of a scale, and this is why what you're doing is so important in the world as far as I'm concerned, is that for the normal person around there, we're at the conscious level, right? It's logical, we can explain it. It's our prefrontal cortex. It's that part of the brain. Even from transformation work, the subconscious mind, it's still, a lot of people find it hard to meditate. Neurodiversity is an area that I kind of specialize in. And a lot of people find it hard to either go into hypnosis or to meditate or to find that. And the reason for that is even though hypnosis is super powerful, if you've got a dysregulated nervous system, there is no way that you are accessing those upper levels. The nervous system is the thing that everything, and this isn't just based on theory, this is based on neuroscience, this is based on biology. We know that the ANS is the first thing that comes on. And if your ANS has been damaged or there's some sort of trauma, we know this from studies that I think it was done in Harvard and Stanford around ADHD. and what happens in the third trimester of birth in regards to how, people say it's a dysregulated brain, but why did it dysregulate? It didn't adapt it. And so we're adaptive creatures, right? And so as we look at what you're trying to do, that solution is you can't change and adapt without data. So you can do all the breath work you want, but actually you need to bring the awareness from below, as above, as below, right? So you
Yeah.
then meet yourself in the middle of
Mm-hmm.
where that truth is about who you are. So this sounds complex, right? It sounds for the normal for me it isn't. I can see it, but for most people, this is really, really complex, Nicole. How the heck are we going to do this?
Yeah,
How can the normal
we can break
person
it
on the
down.
street do this? So what is that solution that inTruth have provided that makes it simple, easy, replicable, and something that somebody could even start right now today and do?
Yeah, so I mean, we're talking about the theory of change, right? And when
Mm,
people hear about our technology, the most common next question is that, what's the so what? Tell me what to do. And I just want to sort of put a, pin in that,
mm,
because the ability to see yourself in and of itself has a transformational effect.
mm,
And that's going to be hard to understand until you actually have that experience with the data, right? But there's other examples I could draw on that most people are familiar with. If you did Myers-Briggs for the first time, or you did some other, psychometric
mm,
assessment, have you ever had that experience where you were like, wow, that helped me understand something about myself that previously I didn't understand?
mm,
Now, that Myers-Briggs assessment isn't telling you how to live your life. It's just helping you understand what you are.
mm,
So the transformational component to what we've built, just being able to see into yourself clearly and in a very kind of nuanced way, because it is a real-time data stream and it can look at your patterns, throughout your days, throughout your weeks, throughout your months, in context to different relationships, to different activities. That is a whole lot of you is invisible and unconscious to you. And it will have a natural effect on the way that you navigate life without
mm,
us as a company needing to kind of nefariously figure out how our product becomes, addictive because we're telling you how to live your life all the time. And in some ways, I'm anti it. These are problems that we have to actively solve as a company, because every person and their dog wants us to develop a model that you can ask any question to, and we could, give you some recommendations on what to do. And I think there's maybe a place for that. We have the data to do it. You turn on geolocation, you turn on calendar integration, plus you have a real-time data stream that's going straight to your emotional state in the ANS. You can provide a lot of context to someone, but it kind of in some ways can cross an ethical bridge, because what we're already seeing is people outsourcing breakup texts to ChatGPT, what they're going to have to lunch for lunch to ChatGPT. And part of my position as a founder in the space is, if we don't, as companies, draw some of these boundaries, the user's not going to, because the user becomes dependent, you know, on what we tell them to do. So I want to put those ideas forward, um, because
I
these
agree,
are,
actually, because that was one of my questions. It was like, how do we stop outsourcing emotional awareness? Because
yeah,
as humans, we want to take that quick fix. We One of the things that's quite interesting, actually, when as we go up into the chemical layer, it's interesting how a lot of the solutions out there are based on serotonin and dopamine. And one of the
mm,
things that I noticed from a bit of study is that one of the things that nobody talks about is oxytocin.
mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is because no scientist yet has been able to create a pill that is oxytocin. We know a hug is the best way
Surprise,
to get
surprise.
oxytocin, right?
Yeah,
So if we look at it from that perspective, and we're looking at the nervous system and how those layers come up, and we're looking at having that autonomy of understanding the true self
yeah,
and using inTruth as a lens, as a framework.
exactly.
This is where I am at the moment. hey, I need to become, a lot of the work that I do with clients is becoming the observer of the situation rather
Exactly.
than being the situation. And
Yeah.
so, is that something that you're starting to look at where you use this technology to give you data to observe it as an independent kind of mediator so that you got informed choice of where you move next? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that I would love our community to welcome the observer effect, which is something I reference a lot when I'm talking about a theory of change, as enough. Because to me, that is the greatest enhancer of human agency.
Mm,
I think we've become overly dependent on companies to tell us who to be and what to do and what to
yeah.
think and how to behave. And, I really subscribe to actually the BMJ's definition of health back in 2011. It was my favorite definition of health, which is summarized basically as health is agency. When one feels
Yes.
a sense of agency over their mind, they're mentally healthy. A sense of agency over their physicality, they're physically healthy. Um, and I really believe that deeply. And I think that the contentious issue is the intersection that we sit as a startup is somewhere between the invention of the blood pressure machine and a social media platform that is stimulating your amygdala every 5 seconds.
Yeah.
And the way that we design this, I feel a huge amount of responsibility actually, because there's a lot we can do with the data. There's a lot of data in someone's phone that we can tap into and start to relate our insights on top of. But you don't use a blood pressure cuff and then get angry at the blood pressure cuff for not telling you what to do about your blood pressure.
Mm,
So it's about us understanding our place in the market. And there's brilliant people, like your community and like many people that are now using inTruth, that have dedicated their entire lives to different modalities. And perhaps we're better actually, taking a back seat and empowering those people to enhance their work through more nuanced data streams than we are to, you know, tell our users what to do every second of every
and I
day.
think, you know what, this is why I got you on this call, because one of the things that we tend to see a lot in the health sector is this method is better than this method, or this method is better than this method. And actually, if we look at this from a collaborative perspective, because if we go back to music, right, you can have a single violin playing, but when you bring
Mm,
the rest of the orchestra in and you get that polyphonic sound, it creates an emotion. And when we look at mental health, that's what it should be. It's
mm,
not just mental health, it's mental health, it's physical health, because we know the mind affects the body affects the
yeah.
mind, right? It's that loop. And so we are just a wave. Our mind is just a wave. We're not this body, we're not
Mm,
this mind. They're just tools. So really, becoming the observer, what I often say is sometimes you need a saw to saw wood. And yes, you
mm,
can use a saw to hammer in a nail, but is it the right tool? And the way that I
yeah.
see in truth is the master tradesman that's telling the apprentice,
Hmm.
listen, you can use that saw to hammer in the nail, but
Yeah.
maybe there might be an alternative. So, I mean, maybe that's the way in which in truth could look at this, to say, here's some options of approaches or methodologies that you might look into and see how that works, rather than saying, do this, do that. Here's
Yeah.
Rich Litvin once said, I don't know if you know Rich Litvin, amazing, amazing coach. And he was talking about price lists, and he said, never have a price list, have a menu. And I guess in truth, one of the things in truth can start to look at is that how do we show you what's happening,
Yeah.
what you're intolerant to, what works for you, and then maybe the various different ways in which you can create your own menu, which is your own life, which comes back into that thing that we're both passionate about, is giving people the autonomy to live their truth. Because when we give people permission
Yeah.
to do that, the world naturally changes. The world naturally becomes, a better
Exactly.
place. Um, so with that in mind, where are you now within truth? Kind of what's the big plan over the next year, 5 years, 10 years? What is it that you're you're looking to achieve at the moment?
So we launched publicly about 6 months ago now. So we've been working through, the normal pain points that any scaling startup is experiencing. So that's really been a big focus. And for me as a founder, I'm watching deeply how the technology is socialized. Having a public profile too, I have a lot of people reach out to me all the time, sharing
That's why I got it
unsolicited,
now, because I know you're going to be really busy.
unsolicited feedback on the product, but I do love it, so I welcome it. Maybe just send it through support at not my personal channels, but it's been fascinating because I see that there are a lot of vulnerable people too, and there's that tendency, I think, sometimes to become emotionally attached to a tool that is helping you understand yourself. And I'm like very committed to understanding how we design this in a way that can truly enhance human agency and not just drive shareholder returns, right? So
Yeah.
that's a big, like any founder, and I'm very willing, unlike a lot of founders, to talk transparently about that. The capital that we bring on our journey is going to have a very big say, in
Yeah.
in where we go. And so as we go through our next funding rounds, I'm really looking for patient capital who deeply care about the human impact this technology is going
Yeah.
to have, because it's real. You're dealing with people's emotions. Um, there's a world before clinical approval for us, which is FDA TGA, which we anticipate should take another 18 to 24 months. What we're bringing to the FDA is basically a series of diagnostic claims, which we're very confident we'll get approval on. So things
Mhm.
like inTruth can be used as a diagnostic tool for PTSD, for anxiety, for depression. The gates that I see opening up through that clinical approval is incredible, because then you have a path to connect to Medicare and Medicaid in the US, Medicare in Australia, the NHS in
Mhm.
Britain, and actually have this be distributed as a tool no different to the blood pressure cuff that
Yeah.
doctors can actually start to include in the way that they engage with patients, which to me would be a huge success. I'd love to spearhead this idea that emotion is and should be considered a biomarker, and to have a robust enough scientific framework that actually quantifies that within healthcare. But then there are all of these other applications for inTruth's core capability that, even for me, have been blowing my mind, because inTruth is not a product. It is a product, but beneath the product is a model that could actually be turned into many products. So
Mhm.
we have a lot of interest, for example, from wellness and longevity property developers. And we talk about what it would mean to actually integrate this data into the home system, where all of a sudden you have an intuitive environment that can actually calibrate to your nervous system, which is, hyper exciting.
Mm.
Everywhere from that to frontline workers. I think we've talked about that, Marcus,
Yeah.
like police and military. So
Yeah.
I think inTruth, and I'm just, speaking, if I had a magic wand and all my dreams could come true, I don't want to be in this cycle where our biggest focus as a team is creating a liquid return in 3 years,
Mm.
because I think it would be an undersell for what this company can truly do in terms of the human impact.
Mm.
But it's TBD. Like, I have a responsibility to my current shareholders. I have a responsibility to my team. And I'm doing my best and very gun ho
Mm.
about where the cards are going to land in all of this, whilst also acknowledging that I won't be the CEO of the company forever. So it's an exciting series of problems to have, and I think the right conversations are opening up. I think there's an element of timing that's on our side. It wasn't the case when we started the company, or when I started the company and built my team, that people were talking about human intelligence, nervous system regulation, nervous system, emotional awareness, like what it means to be human right now is even in
Mm.
question because of the rise of AI.
Yeah.
So I think we're now sort of naturally getting positioned in some of the most important conversations that we're having globally, And so what I really hope will come from that is, um, the right alliances and the right allies to really bring this to life the way that um, I believe it deserves.
I mean, advocacy is so important. One of the reasons why I wanted to get you on to have this conversation was for that advocacy. I know this product works. It's fantastic. What you're doing is it's very mission led. It's very heart led. It's trying to resolve a big problem in
Yeah.
the world. Um, and so if we look at money, I've got a phrase: good people with money can change the world. I think
Mm-hmm.
good people who are using inTruth can change the world, because the biggest issue that most practitioners have in the well-being space, if I'm a PT, I can take you through a program, show your before picture, and I can show your after picture.
Yeah.
The investment in physical health is there because if I'm a CFO, I'm going to say, okay, I want to be able to see a tangible change. When it comes to emotion, that's very, very difficult, right? And so if I'm a practitioner, I'm just a normal practitioner that's out there that wants to do good in the world. I want to be able to prove my results beyond testimonial so that, medical clinics and stuff will take my work seriously. I can tangibly give them some data. How do I start that journey now? Because we talked about the big picture, but what is it that I can do right now?
Oh
How
yeah.
can and how does my client benefit from that? How do they get the data? How do I get the data? So real practical things that people can go and
Yeah.
download the app, start using it straight away.
Yeah, so it's exactly that. So the first product we took to market 6 months ago is a combination of an end user app, which if you have a Garmin watch, you could go to the App Store right now, download inTruth and start using it and interacting with the data. But for the purposes identical to what you just described, we've built a dashboard, and you can check that out at dashboard.intruth.io, where you, as a coach, for example, or a practitioner, can send an invitation to those end users who can then give you consent to see their data visibly in your dashboard. And the B2B dashboard takes you deeper into that data and allows you to actually start to analyze what's really going on for your client in the context of their life, and also allows you to look at aggregate data of a, say, team or a cohort you're taking through a program, for example. So that's being used right now. It is very popular amongst coaches. We actually find that that kind of space, well-being practitioners, coaches, love it. And the problem it's solving for them is, A, they can all of a sudden prove their impact, exactly the pain point you just
Yeah.
described. A PT can show you before and after, or we're providing that same data-driven insight. Hey, after 8 weeks of, I don't know, doing my breathwork process, your nervous system baseline moved from here to here.
Mm.
Your ability to regulate your emotions moved from here to here, so it becomes quantifiable. And then beneath that, we're noticing a lot of people using the data to get specific insights into what works for them. So because it's real time, you can actually look at, I'll give an example. I was invited recently to this well-being clinic. They were fans of inTruth, and they wanted to host me to test all of the different interventions at the clinic. And one of the interventions I was really amazed by because of the impact it had on my data. It was actually a room with scalar wave technology. And I walked into the room, and all the scalar wave technology was around me. And I looked at my emotion score, and within 15 minutes, my emotion score jumped from like 58 to about 85. So it kind of like completely regulated my nervous system.
Mm.
Um, to give like a comparative example, I could do like a yin yoga class for 90 minutes and my emotion score might change 1 or 2 points. So this was really like, wow, there's something about this for me that's like really effective. So all of a sudden I have this insight to know what's my cheat sheet to
Mm.
actually help me regulate my nervous system. So a lot of coaches are using it like that.
And I think this is really important because you mentioned the yoga thing. And one of the things that I found, I'm a massive geek when it comes to the nervous system and all that sort of stuff. But it's interesting how we've outsourced the process of understanding our nervous system in regards to breath work, yoga. But actually, we know that stress stacking the nervous system
Yeah.
So we may have a dysregulated nervous system. We go and do yoga, or we go to the gym and we do a HIIT workout because we're told, oh, that's good for my mental health, right? But actually, you're damaging the nervous system even more. But something like, wait a minute, I went for a walk in nature for half an hour, and my nervous system all of a sudden, now you can go, oh, right, okay, so this environment works for me
Yeah.
now. And then you can start to move around, and that level of autonomy to understand self, I think, is the power of what you're trying to do, isn't it? It
Exactly.
actually, we're not outsourcing, we're giving the autonomy to say, in this moment right now, where is my toolkit of environments that I can move from given this state, so I can regulate my nervous system, so we start to close the gap to well-being, and then everything else stacks on top of that. Is that really what it's all about, isn't it? It's about the autonomy of finding the environments that help you live a better life.
Yeah, well, exactly. Part of the thing with the nervous system is people don't even think about the nervous system, right? So
Mm,
when they're thinking about the quality of their life, they haven't even drawn the connection
yeah.
to be like, regulating my nervous system and prioritizing what regulates my nervous system is actually going to be a huge contributor to leading a more fulfilled, more vital life, right? So that's step one. Step two is to start to understand, in the context of your life and probably your busy life, what are the various inputs that you have and how is that actually affecting you? And that's not to say, okay, you start wearing inTruth and you can see, every time you pitch to an investor, I'll give a personal example, it stresses your nervous system. It doesn't mean you should now never pitch, right? For me, what it shows me is, okay, I need to give myself more support around that particular activity.
Mm,
And this is what I was going to speak to before. Our model is called React and Rebound, and they're two of our critical metrics. What it's looking at is your react is how quick is your sympathetic nervous system to activate, and your rebound is how quick and effective is your parasympathetic nervous system at being able to rebound. So if I can see in my data that every time I go into a pitch, or even hours before the pitch, or sometimes even days before the pitch, my rebound isn't where it really needs to be in this optimal state, I all of a sudden have the insight and have used inTruth to know what actually helps that rebound, to start to actually feed that into my schedule, so that when I do that stressor, my ability to recover from that stressor is far greater. When you don't have those interventions and systems in place, what that's going to lead to, which many people, in the startup world, for example, experience all the time, is this kind of this chronic strained sense of burnout,
mm,
and they feel like whatever I'm doing doesn't work. Well, you're not even really able to analyze what's not working. That you're
yeah.
just doing it based on these kind of rudimentary symptoms of, well, I wake up and I just feel tired, and you just feel overwhelmed at the sense of like, what's actually contributing to that? I don't know how to diagnose it. So this just gives you a lens, and I think a very powerful lens. I would also recommend, if you relate to the example I just gave, use inTruth. Also go and get a blood panel and understand your hormones. Also
Mm,
go and understand, all of the different intersections. But we've seen that the data we bring has just been missing,
yeah.
and and
And
it
I think with
illuminates
that
a
as
very important piece. Yeah,
I think it goes back to what we said before, is this is the foundation, because a lot of people, again, are medicating. They're using CBD, they're using
yeah,
NMN, they're using magnesium glycinate, and
peptides.
yeah, yeah, and these are all great, but unless you know what you're building that on, when is the best time for you to take it? When is
Yeah,
that going to be most bioavailable in your body? So you need your bloods, you need to do this. It is a mixture of things, but actually the fundamental thing here is that everybody's starting at the top when you should be starting at the bottom, because
yeah,
once you talked about that rebound of going into the parasympathetic. So if people don't know what that is, so you've got two states in your autonomic nervous system. Your sympathetic, which is your fight, flight, freeze. That's when you go into that emotional state. Like, for millions of years, we didn't even speak.
mm,
And so we want to be as spend as much time in our parasympathetic, our rest and digest, because when we're in parasympathetic, that means the parts, the higher cortexes of our brain that use logic come online. And so you can't build a strong parasympathetic nervous system. You can't tap into those cortexes of the brain where we can start to create and do things, the things that made humanity what it is, unless you've got that nervous system regulation in there. And then I think this is why the work you're doing is so important. And more people need to know about this, because get this right, everything
Yeah.
changes, right?
Well, we agree. Yeah,
Yeah.
we agree. And you were saying before, like, how do you explain this very simply? Um, just helping people understand that these levels of dysregulation inside of you are contributing to why you feel the way you feel and why you react to people the way you react, because a lot of people don't know why they react the way they
Yeah.
react. You can yell at someone you love that has a real impact on your life. Like, there's a real consequence to that,
Mm.
and you can leave that reaction being like, why did I do that? That's not who I wanted to be. And you feel out of control of, and you feel helpless. I don't know how to
Mm.
change that. And there's more to that story. It's not just a matter of mental willpower, and that's why you haven't been able to change that behavior.
Mm.
And I think I would love to see this data give people back a sense of compassion for themselves, because if you're
Yeah.
in that sympathetic overdrive, like you were just explaining, like a constant state of fight, flight, freeze, fawn, um, of course you can't be the person you want to be.
No.
And by the way, which is my passion behind like data and tech and how tech is designed, the entire economy of technology right now is invested in you being dysregulated.
Yeah.
Like, the incentive behind these companies and the money behind these companies is to keep you in a heavily dysregulated state, because that's what causes you to obsessively check Instagram every 5 seconds and engage in this kind of obsessive addictive way with these technologies as a distraction, because you've lost all ability to actually regulate your nervous system. And the nefarious part about it is tech companies are aware of this a lot more than the individuals in our world are aware of this. And when you think about, even the lawsuits that have been happening recently with Meta and YouTube and things with children, there's a real human impact to all of this that I really hope we do get on top of. Like, this is something that we need to fix, because it's affecting our society in a very, very deep way. Like, you getting sucked into algorithmic echo chambers that are designed to keep you in a dysregulated state and designed to prevent you from being able to experience other people as your kin, you
Mhm.
know, um, is the cause, really, of why your mental health isn't good and
Yeah.
why you don't feel vital. But the thing is, it's been very hard to affirm or deny, because there's no health check, right?
No.
Like, but now we're starting to see on the brain volume side that short form content and overuse of LLMs is actually creating atrophy in the brain. And that's like a very important thing to understand, because
Mm.
we need to reclaim that sovereignty. Like, you should not be like willing to shrink your brain
Yeah.
volume because of overuse of LLMs. Like, that's a crazy boundary that's been crossed. And I believe as we grow in traction, we'll be able to unveil the same truth
Yeah.
of how these things have affected the human nervous system.
We could carry this conversation on for probably the next few days. You're busy.
Yeah.
So I just want to end with one final question. You talk on stage about this. You're very passionate about it. That comes across, and that's why I wanted to have this conversation with you, because you're doing amazing stuff in the world. But given all the times you've spoken on stage, podcasts, what's the one question that nobody's ever asked you that you'd like to give the answer to? So what's the one question about, Nicole's drive for inTruth, what inTruth doing? What's the one thing that you wish somebody would ask you that they haven't asked you?
I suppose really it's something to do with, like, where does this all go if all of your crazy, dreams come true? What does the world look like? Because I really think we'd be living in a very different world if more
Mm,
founders had asked that question. Imagine if Zuckerberg sat down in 2010 and thought, okay, if every person in the world starts using Meta, what's the world actually going to look like? And considered the implication of that. So that's something. And for me, I want us to live in a world that is truly compassionate and sovereign.
mm,
And to me, that looks like each individual having the autonomy over their own system, their physiology, their mind, to be expressive, and within that, to be able to preserve all the things that we were talking about in the beginning of this chat, our culture, our who we are. Like I think there's a version of technocracy that's emerging right now, and globalism that's emerging right now, that could end up in a complete homogeny.
mm.
And to me, that would be a terrible thing. It would be a heartbreaking thing. And whatever we can do to illuminate the best of what makes us human, I believe that that should be at the forefront of all of our minds right now.
So really what I'm hearing is inTruth's mission, and the app is all about self-governance. It's a tool in which you can see what's really happening in the world and in yourself through analyzing your nervous system, which gives you that informed choice. And it's that ripple, isn't it? One person starts to use inTruth and because has that self-awareness. One person starts to understand they have autonomy in their life. And as that ripple happens, then the world starts to change for good. So
We hope so.
I think the best way to end this now is if you believe the world needs to change, if you
Yeah.
believe that good people should be showing up in the world, if you're a practitioner, if you're an organization that believes in this conversation of self-autonomy, self-governance, and building a world that really needs to change for the better, how do they get the app? What do they do? Where do they go next? How do they connect with you? Clearly, we don't give your email address out because you're busy. Um, how do people start that journey with inTruth?
You can search it on the App Store, so it's in space truth, and then the dashboard.intruth.io URL is the way to understand how to use it in your business. You can just go to intruth.io and also look at the whole website. And yeah, if you're a researcher, I'm sure there's a few in your network, Marcus, and this aligns with any research that you might be doing. Like, I think that's a really interesting inroad. So just email admin@intruth.io, and we can connect you with our chief of research and regulation. Yeah, I'd say they're the three best ways.
Yeah, and just actually before we wrap up, just to say you've got a massive team behind you that are all professionals. They're neuroscientists. They're like proper big geeky brainy people, aren't they?
Yes, a
You're the
lot smarter
forefront,
than
but
me.
you've got an amazing team behind you that's doing everything.
A
So,
lot smarter than me. A lot of PhDs and doctors. Yeah.
um, okay, as we wrap this up, I just want to say thank you for coming on and having this conversation with me. I truly appreciate it. I know you're so busy, you're all over the place, so I feel very honored that you showed up to share this.
Thanks,
um,
Marcus.
I will be pushing this out across every social media that I have. I think this is a conversation that people need to listen into, and we will stay in touch. I've got some projects that are coming on which I'm hoping that I can bring inTruth into. So I'll definitely be in touch with you on that. But just thank you for not just creating inTruth, but for showing up in the world in a way that is authentic, that is real, that is vulnerable, and that gives people hope that in a world that seems so dysregulated, that we can start to find that calmness in our nervous system once again. So, Nicole, thank you so
Marcus.
much.
Thank you.